Hey everyone, I'm Joe, and today I'm here to continue my series of newer Star Wars movie reviews. And now we're here today to talk about Star Wars The Last Jedi. Yes, we've gotten to this point in this series. Oh my god.
Hold on to your butts.
It's been 2 years since the movie's released, so I would imagine most people have seen it by now, but in case you haven't, I will be discussing spoilers, so be warned. Star Wars The Last Jedi picks up pretty much where Force Awakens left off. Rey meets up with Luke to train in the ways of the Force. Kylo Ren and the First Order are continuing to look for Luke. Finn and a character named Rose trying to help the Resistance, but have to go to a certain planet in order to get the information that they need in order to help the Resistance and find Rey. I really don't know where exactly to begin with Star Wars The Last Jedi, but the hype leading up to this movie after Force Awakens was honestly huge. I, for one, love The Force Awakens. I will not be ashamed in saying that. I think it's probably the best Star Wars has been since the original trilogy. Yes, I'm going there. Don't hit me, guys. Don't hate me. And despite Rogue One being a disappointment with some enjoyable aspects, I was still very much looking forward to The Last Jedi at the time. If you've seen my trailer reviews, you can go back and watch them on my channel. With Rian Johnson, the guy who made Looper and some of the best episodes of Breaking Bad, I was very curious to see what kind of vision he was going to bring to the table in this trilogy. And I did review it at the time. I think if I remember correctly, I said it was a really good movie, but not necessarily a great one. And the release of this film was flooded with so much hate. It was so vitriolic. My god, the reactions to this movie. I mean, how many times am I gonna have to see in my recommendations list why Star Wars The Last Jedi was a complete cinematic failure? And how many times do I have to hear that The Last Jedi ruined the Star Wars franchise? And on top of that, people automatically accuse Lucasfilm and Disney of using the films as some kind of liberal feminist agenda, saying that it was out on a crusade against white people. Man, doesn't it strike you how insightful those people who make those claims are? I wonder how they were able to figure that out. Okay, all that aside, Last Jedi was a very polarizing movie. After time went on, I got to the point where I said it wasn't really that good. It was really, really bad. And because of how much hate the movie had gotten, honestly, my love of Star Wars just decreased and probably was dead for a while because the hatred amongst the fans was just so toxic. I literally did not enjoy talking about Star Wars for about a good year and a half. It just wasn't as fun to talk about the series anymore. And even now, it's still a bit uneasy unless you can find people that you know can have a good conversation. I rewatched this movie the other night because I hadn't seen it in its entirety since I saw it in the theaters for a second time. And after being disappointed with the direction they took, I decided to watch it again and try to block out all the noise that's surrounding this movie. Honestly, I think it's fine. I wouldn't say it's a bad movie necessarily, but it does have some problems, and it has some elements that just honestly make me cringe and just roll my eyes and any other negative feeling or thought that comes to my head. But let's not waste any more time. Let's talk about The Last Jedi, because I've got some things to say about it. So the movie opens up with the Resistance escaping the planet that they were based on after the First Order has tracked them down, and Poe Dameron is in his X-Wing with BB-8, and they're trying to distract the First Order fleet in order to cover the escape of the Resistance ships. As far as an opening to a Star Wars film, it gets right into the action instantaneously. It doesn't waste any time trying to explain everything. We've already seen that in the opening crawl. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's good fun Star Wars. It's exactly what we want to see in a Star Wars movie. Don't waste any time. Get right to the action and let's have fun with it. And even antagonizes General Hux a little bit as he's approaching this really dangerous Star Destroyer.
Can he hear me?
Hugs?
He can.
With an H? Skinny guy? Kind of pasty?
It's a unique kind of humor, but I don't know if that entirely works in Star Wars because from what we see, they don't have cell phones there. It's comical, but it feels a little out of place. And then we cut to the planet Ahch-To. That's the planet that Luke was on. Politely, please, let me know in the comments. Rey meets up with Luke, hands him the lightsaber, and then out of nowhere... Unexpected, isn't it? It made me laugh the first time I saw it, but since Rian Johnson is behind the camera on this, certain things in this movie leading up to that moment made me go, this doesn't feel right. In fact, leading up to this movie, the promotion, everything that I was hearing about it, that it's not going to go the way you expect, it's going to subvert your expectations, it goes in unexpected directions, which, on principle, I don't think that's a bad thing, but it did make me wonder, like, is Rian Johnson gonna basically go the opposite direction? Because probably the biggest complaint that people had about The Force Awakens was that it was too familiar, it felt too much like A New Hope, or it was too safe. I just couldn't help but wonder, did they take all those complaints to heart and tried so hard to make something completely different, because that's not a good thing to do. We all know how you don't want to let fan service bog down your filmmaking. On the other hand, you shouldn't let people's demands of doing something different and original affect you either. If you have a vision and you want to share it with people, even if they may not like it, go for it. But don't cater to a certain crowd just because they were upset. The opening crawl of this movie basically sums up everything that we know from The Force Awakens. And also hearing leading up to the release that the movie takes place right after Force Awakens, I couldn't help but wonder, that's an odd choice. But then the opening crawl happens and I thought, yeah, I already know that stuff. And then when we get to Luke on the island, and instead of the gray overcast that we saw at the end of Force Awakens, this scene supposedly takes place right after the ending of TFA. The sun's out, it's getting later in the day. I realize that it might be a nitpick, but still, something about that scene kind of bothered me. The moment that Luke threw the lightsaber over his shoulder, that's when I realized, the entire movie's gonna be like that, isn't it? Going in the complete opposite direction of what you expect, subverting your expectations and doing something original just because people wanted it to be. I was really hoping that that wasn't the case, but again, the moment he threw the lightsaber over his shoulder, I knew that it was more or less everything that I feared it would be. I don't want to sound completely negative because there are good things about The Last Jedi. I've still stuck with that for the last 2 years. The biggest issue I have with The Last Jedi, it's not necessarily just them going in the opposite direction, although that doesn't really help, is that it's very uneven. And at times it feels slightly rushed. You have the Luke and Rey dynamic along with Kylo Ren, and you have Poe Dameron and him trying to figure out what to do in case the Resistance is in danger. And then you have Finn and Rose on the planet Canto Bight, or that town Canto Bight, which that storyline, I think everybody has said it by now, that sequence is completely unnecessary. It feels like a totally different movie. It doesn't feel like Star Wars. It felt too much like Star Trek meets The Hunger Games, and it ruins the whole pacing of the movie. In fact, I remember at the time when after we saw this, my mom said to me, you know what, I really enjoyed that movie, but I didn't like that sequence with Rose and Finn. I thought that was really boring, and that struck me as pretty much right. Let's try to push aside my gripes for a bit and be realistic. The Luke, Rey, and Kylo Ren stuff, that to me is the best part of the film. That is probably where the film has a lot of emotional weight. Rey is trying to get Luke to come back to the Resistance. Luke is very standoffish. He doesn't want to join because he's afraid of what's going to happen. He doesn't want to face his past mistakes. Almost the complete opposite of what we know Luke to be in the original films. But that being said, this is still Luke Skywalker. I've seen a lot of people say that he was very out of character. You could debate whether or not that's actually true, but I've always felt that no, this is still Luke Skywalker. He's emotionally broken. Something that he tried to carry on ended blowing up in his face again, just like it did with his father and Obi-Wan. Only this time, his one apprentice who turned against him was his nephew, Ben Solo, Kylo Ren. Not only as a Jedi and as a hero, he felt like he failed, but he also failed as an uncle and as a brother. I've always felt that was a pretty logical explanation for why he went into hiding. Now, he does mention in the movie that he went there to die. It's a slight contradiction to The Force Awakens because they found the map to Luke Skywalker, and supposedly he left it in case anybody decided to find him. And if that was the case, why would he do that if he just wanted to go to the island to die? And now, maybe he didn't think that at first. Maybe he wanted to hold on to some kind of hope that he was going to make things right again. And then later on, after failing so many times, he decided, screw it. I'm done with the Jedi. The Jedi have to go. And if that was the case, I really wish they would have explained that. I don't want to sound overly negative in this video, but there needed to be more clarification, some more explanation. And I like seeing the dynamic of Luke and Rey, seeing that it's very reminiscent of Luke and Yoda in Empire. Completely different though, because Luke wanted to be a Jedi like his father. Rey wants to know what exactly is going on inside of her, and she needs someone like Luke Skywalker to help her. And it does try to address the question of, should the Jedi go on, should they not go on?
It was a Jedi Master who was responsible for the training and creation of Darth Vader.
And a Jedi who saved him.
And then he later talks about how one night he went to confront Ben and how it all fell apart and the Jedi Order that he had built was destroyed. You could see the pain and regret in Luke's face because it was his nephew, his family, his blood, that mighty Skywalker blood, as he says. And I have to say, Mark Hamill, for me, he's the best part of this movie. Leading up to this new trilogy, especially The Last Jedi, I was really excited to see how Mark Hamill was going to be because Luke is my favorite character in Star Wars. And Mark Hamill, he is great here. Now, there's a lot of videos out there saying that Mark Hamill strongly disagreed with Rian Johnson's interpretation. Whether or not that's actually true, Mark Hamill absolutely nails this character. This does not feel out of character to me for Luke. You could still tell that it's him. He's just been through so much hell. He tried so hard to rebuild the Jedi Order, and it just didn't work out. Because if you think about it, in the original trilogy, he was the last remaining Jedi besides Obi-Wan and Yoda, and he was their only hope to rebuild the Jedi Order again. And then when he tried to do that, history started to repeat itself. His father became the most hated man in the galaxy, and his nephew is becoming the same thing. And all that pain, all that darkness, all that tragedy pushed him over the edge to the breaking point. And I think Mark Hamill nails it 100%. And one of the many examples that you can tell that it's still Luke Skywalker is scenes like this. And Kylo Ren. Adam Driver continues to impress. I don't want to say that I like him more than Darth Vader, but one thing that I've always felt about Kylo Ren is like with the mask and without the mask, he just oozes darkness. There's just something about that character that is so riveting for me. That, yeah, in a way he is the Darth Vader of this new trilogy, but he's also the reverse Darth Vader. Instead of struggling against the dark, he's struggling against the light. And he's willing to do anything to fight against the light side. He's a guy with nothing to lose and everything to prove. And in that respect, I think that actually makes him a very scary and unpredictable villain. You don't know exactly how far he's gonna go or what he's gonna do. And his dynamic with Rey is also a great part of this movie, because that's another thing that I've heard people complain about is the Force connection between the two. They're able to sort of see each other in their environments. Maybe not their entire surroundings, but they're able to see one another. Later on, that's explained that Snoke bridged their minds together. But seeing Kylo Ren and Rey going at each other, it's one of those things that you kind of knew that the rivalry was going to spring up sooner or later. Rey starts off being very hateful towards Kylo Ren for killing Han, but Kylo Ren's oddly very patient with her. He's very kind and kind of sympathetic, but also very manipulative. He is a dark side user after all. And the fact that they can sort of see each other in their environments, that's a really cool idea, and that's a great way to expand on the powers of the Force. Does it create some plot holes in the other Star Wars stories? Yeah, probably, but at the end of the day, I didn't really mind it. And I guarantee you, 30, 40 years from now when people watch this for the first time, they will not care. Just like I reacted when I first saw this, I thought, wow, okay, Jedi can do that now. It's gonna be a similar situation here. People years from now, they're not gonna care. Star Wars fans, well, that's another story. And another detail I like about that is like at one point when Rey is standing next to the Falcon and it's raining outside, and after Kylo and Rey have a conversation with one another, at one point he wipes his face and he looks down on his hand and you see rainwater on his glove. So it does raise the question, is it possible to transport matter through the Force plane? I guess it's one of those things where it's left to the audience's imagination. Either way, I still think it's a really cool idea. Oh, and Luke's first lesson with Rey, where he teaches her to reach out, and she reaches out with her hand. Oh my god, it's hilarious.
I feel something.
You feel it?
Yes, I feel it.
That's the Force.
Really?
Wow, it must be really strong
Oh,
with
I've
you.
never felt any... Ow!
But that's also a really striking scene because when she's able to feel the Force, light, dark, chaos, balance, peace, another really interesting way to explain the Force, but then when she sees that dark hole along the cliff, she goes right down into the hole through the Force. And Luke obviously is very resistant to teach Rey.
I've seen this raw strength only once before. In Ben Solo. It didn't scare me enough then. It does now.
Meanwhile, up in space, the Resistance fleet is on the run from the First Order fleet because they're able to track them through hyperspace with a certain tracking device on board the flagship of Supreme Leader Snoke. So Finn, Poe, and Rose Tico, an engineer on one of the Resistance ships, comes up with a plan to sneak to Canto Bight, find this guy called the Codebreaker, and use his skills to destroy the tracking device on the ship, which leads to Canto Bight. And as I said earlier, this part of the movie is really unnecessary and it does not feel like it fits in Star Wars. And the social commentary, I'm not against that in Star Wars because, let's face it, there's always been political themes in Star Wars. I mean, to those people who act like it's a new thing in this new trilogy, how about you guys actually do your research? George Lucas's politics were and are well known. He described Emperor Palpatine as Richard Nixon in the original trilogy, and in the prequel trilogy, he described Anakin as George Bush and Vice President Cheney as the Emperor. Those are just a couple of examples, but my point is, this is not the first time that Star Wars has had political themes. As far as this one goes, the animal rights thing and the black marketing where this town is profiteering off of the war between the Resistance and the First Order, I don't really think that was necessary. If you want to tell a story about that stuff, okay, fine, but go do it in another movie. Don't tell that story in this movie because this is not the time to be experimenting with Star Wars, Ryan. You can't do that. You have to follow the framework of this trilogy. And the character of Rose, I feel really bad for saying this because Kelly Marie Tran did not deserve any of the backlash that she's gotten. And you could say that for actors like Hayden Christensen, Jake Lloyd, and the actor who played Jar Jar, I can't remember his name. I don't really want to blame her necessarily, but she was just doing what she was told to do. But the character started off somewhat interesting when you first meet her. Finn's trying to get away, trying to find Rey, and Rose stops him, and later on they come up with the plan to get to Canto Bight. We saw that her sister was on the last Resistance bomber that was destroyed, so she obviously has an axe to grind against the First Order. But then when we get to the town of Canto Bight, I don't really find her that interesting of a character because she's going on about how much she hates Canto Bight, and I find her to be very bland after a while, and saying things like,
I wish I could put my fist through this whole lousy, beautiful town.
what does that remind you of?
So this is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.
This is not Attack of the Clones bad or Phantom Menace bad, but it's very, very reminiscent of the prequels, and it honestly made me groan. Eventually, they end up running into the Codebreaker, played by Benicio del Toro. With his help in BB-8, they've managed to break the animals out of their cages with the help of those little broom children, or that broom boy that we later see at the very end of the movie, and they head towards the First Order fleet. Going back to the Luke and Rey stuff, that Canto Bight sequence plays into my next point. Because we keep cutting back to that storyline, we don't really get enough time to fully experience Luke and Rey's teacher-student relationship. We don't see a whole lot of training with Rey. We do see some of it, but we don't really get a whole ton of it. I like what we see, but there's not enough of it. Just like the question of should the Jedi go on or not, it does get resolved at the end of the movie where Luke says, I won't be the last Jedi, but there's also no context as to what exactly led him to say that. And I think another scene or two would have helped. And that's a struggle that this film has. Because of that, it skims over certain things, and it seemed like Rian Johnson was a little more focused on telling his own story over here, not really focusing on what was going on over here. And another example of that, where Rey has another forced conversation with Kylo Ren, with a really gratuitous shot of him topless. She goes down into that dark hole and asks, I want to see my parents. And she sees this dark silhouette. It fades away, and she sees her reflection. And then the next scene, she seems to be very sympathetic with the guy. Now, he did tell her the story about Luke coming to confront him in seemingly a very dark kind of way, where he was very, intent on killing him. She started off very mean towards him, and then a couple scenes later, she's so sympathetic with him. That was so rushed. And I've heard some people say that it was probably because she saw him topless. Okay, if that's how you want to put it, but it feels a bit rushed, and I felt like Rian Johnson was in too much of a hurry to get to the next plot point, which I don't want to keep focusing on this too much, but my biggest problem is that even though Rian Johnson has a really unique vision for Star Wars, and the production design, the visual look, and the camera work, I think it's really good stuff, and the acting, I think all around is quite good. But Rian Johnson's approach to this movie, when I think about it, it really makes my eyes roll. Because I heard certain things come out saying that J.J. Abrams had notes for Rian Johnson, and Rian Johnson apparently came on board and said, no, I'm not dealing with any of that. I'm going to tell my own story. And apparently Kathleen Kennedy said to Rian Johnson, do whatever the hell you want to do. And Rian Johnson was like, okay. Let's do it. I'm telling my own story. I don't give a crap what The Force Awakens has done. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but when you think about that, you can clearly see that J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson were not exactly on the same page. And don't tell me that they were completely on the same page from beginning to end, because J.J. Abrams actually said this.
I had some gut instincts about where the story would have gone, but without getting in the weeds on episode 8, that was a story that Rian wrote and was telling based on 7 before we met. So he was taking the thing in another direction. So we also had to respond to episode 8. So our movie was not just following what we had started, it was following what we had started and then had been advanced by somebody else.
Now, maybe they were on the same page in some aspects, but that quote, I think, says it all. He had his own ideas of where the story could have gone, and apparently Rian Johnson started his own story without seeing The Force Awakens first. And again, maybe they were on the same page with some things, but based on that comment, that tells me they did not coordinate. These two plans did not fully coordinate, and J.J. Abrams confirmed that. He was saying it in the most political way possible. For those people who say that, oh, J.J. Abrams was completely on the same page, he said it didn't derail anything that he wanted. What else did you expect J.J. Abrams to say? I don't want to speak for the guy, and even if he didn't hate it, it probably wasn't what he was picturing. He was probably watching it and going, No, I wouldn't have done that. I had something else in mind. What else would you expect him to say? He's not going to say, I hated what Rian Johnson did. That was completely against what I had in mind. He would get into a lot of trouble for saying that stuff, and he would upset the big guys in the studio upstairs. In case you were asking, what do you mean that Rian Johnson wanted to tell his own story? Just from the opening crawl, where he summed up the events of The Force Awakens, the different lighting and camera shots in the scene where Rey hands the lightsaber to Luke, giving a really weird scene to Maz Kanata through a hologram instead of giving her more screen time, because based on The Force Awakens, she knew something about Luke's lightsaber, and the fact that Rian Johnson decided, I'm not interested in her, forget about her. What? And the scene with Snoke berating Kylo Ren, which is a great scene.
Killed Han Solo. When the moment came, I didn't hesitate.
And look at you. The deed split your spirit to the bone. You're no Vader. You're just a child. In a mask.
It's a great scene, but at the same time though, thinking about it in the last 2 years, I thought, Ryan, this is what you do in the last movie of this trilogy. Not to mention the fact that you decided that Rey's parents were not important, and you decided, no, they're actually nobodies. Surprise!
What? Are you kidding me?
And the term that's been used to describe how great or bad this movie is subverting expectations. Not all of that is bad. Rian Johnson does do some of those things really well. Like I said with Luke, being a very grouchy and curmudgeon-y kind of guy, but also still has that endearing heart that we all know from the original trilogy. And also with the character of Poe Dameron, and his arc I thought was pretty unique. We've seen in other movies that there's always that one guy who's always in the right and everybody else is wrong, and he or she is trying to prove otherwise. Similar thing happens in this one, but as it turns out, there was a plan, and he almost ruined it. Poe is basically a know-it-all hothead, just like Tom Cruise in Top Gun, with the big daring move that he made against the Dreadnought earlier, and Leia demotes him, saying, get your head out of your cockpit, which is such a thing Leia would say. So Admiral Holdo is put in command, played by Laura Dern, and this character, I have never been a big fan of hers. The character, though, I thought was really one-dimensional and just honestly really bland and boring. And it's revealed later on in the movie that she and Leia were actually planning to jump ship at just the right moment in order to make a sacrificial move to destroy the First Order fleet. And from what we can tell, and Poe pretty much vocalizes this, we're on a suicide mission because of you. You're not even considering all the other possibilities we have here. We got someone who's gonna destroy the tracking device. What I would have liked to have seen, maybe have her show moments of doubt. Maybe have her say something like, or think that maybe he's right. Maybe I should tell him what's going on. No, I have to stick to the mission. Maybe I should tell him. I don't know. But once Leia wakes up and they all get into their escape ships and Poe realizes what the plan was, and then he becomes a lot more humble and a lot more willing to think before he acts. But back to Luke and Rey. Rey confronts Luke about what really happened with Kylo Ren. And then Luke opens up with the fact that the night he went to confront him, he looked inside his mind and saw the darkness brewing inside of him. And in a moment of sheer panic and instinct, as he says, pass like a fleeting shadow, he thought that maybe he could end it by killing him.
And the last thing I saw were the eyes of a frightened boy whose master had failed him.
Now, I've heard some people talk about this, saying like, I didn't buy that would actually happen. I thought that was so out of character. This is not the first time that Luke let his emotions get the better of him. Does anyone remember Return of the Jedi when Darth Vader said, if you will not turn to the dark side, perhaps she will? And he snapped. Similar thing happens here. Seeing Ben Solo, his nephew, slowly going towards the dark side, I would imagine he was probably thinking, oh God, please don't let this be another Darth Vader. I can't let that happen again. And then when he later turned it on, he clearly says, oh my God, what am I thinking? Not just as an uncle, but as a Jedi. I know better than this. It's another way to humanize Luke, that despite him being a hero and a Jedi, he's a human being. We've all had moments where we let ourselves get so scared that we try to do something, and it's only when our heads clear up and we realize, oh my God, what was I thinking? That was so dumb. So Rey goes off to Kylo Ren, believing that she could bring him back from the darkness. Luke goes to the ancient tree where the Jedi texts are, and then the ghost of Yoda shows up. That legitimately caught me off guard. And he somehow summons a bolt of lightning and destroys the Jedi texts, much to the chagrin of Luke.
The sacred Jedi texts! Oh, read them, have you? Well, I mean, page turners, they were not.
But it's also a great scene where Luke has finally admitted his failure, and Yoda teaches him that failure is actually the greatest teacher. And that's a lesson that anybody can learn from. And that scene actually means a lot to me because I don't want to get too vulnerable with you guys, but almost a year ago, my last job that I had, I tried really hard to keep it, but after a while I kept making one too many mistakes and I was under a lot of scrutiny because of it. And then eventually they decided, you're done. Get out. You're fired. And the day that happened, I was a wreck. Even though I kind of knew that it probably wasn't a good fit for me in the long run, later that night, I actually ended up watching that scene where Yoda teaches Luke that failure is the greatest teacher. And it honestly made me feel a lot better. And it didn't take me that long to find another job, and it's a lot better than where I was last time. Even though I still miss some of the people there that I work with, and every once in a while I do hear from them. But honestly, the fact that I tried really hard and failed anyway, the scene where Yoda teaches Luke about failure, that stuck with me even when I saw it for the first time, and it means a lot more to me now in light of what's happened to me in the last year or so. So Rey meets up with Kylo Ren and confronts Supreme Leader Snoke, who reveals that he bridged their minds together, and Kylo Ren seemingly becomes willfully obedient to Supreme Leader Snoke, but secretly uses Luke's lightsaber to kill Supreme Leader Snoke. That was a bit surprising, and left many Star Wars fans upset. I myself, I was very indifferent to Snoke. I didn't really care that much about him, but the fact that they killed him off at this point in the trilogy, I thought, okay, why did you have him in the first movie to begin with? But then a huge fight ensues between Rey and Kylo Ren and Snoke's personal guard. That was an amazing sequence and felt very much like Last Samurai, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, at least from the scenes that I've seen from that movie. Rian Johnson's imagination is very much inspired by anime, and that sequence is no exception. And the moment where Kylo Ren turns the lightsaber on and it goes right through that guard's head. Oh. That was fantastic, but unfortunately leads to the moment that honestly really got under my skin. Do you know the truth about your parents? Maybe you've already known. Say it. Say it.
They were nobody.
They were filthy junk traders who sold you off for drinking money. You come from nothing. You're nothing. But not to me.
Okay, I'll be honest. Watching it again the other night, having some time to process the movie, it didn't bother me as much as it did 2 years ago when I first saw this, but even then, that scene broke my back. That's where I thought Rian Johnson was trying to be original too much to the point where it ruined it for me. And it also makes me question, why did they set Rey's backstory up as this big mystery in The Force Awakens to begin with?
Where do you come from? Classified, really? Me too. Big secret.
Because they don't make such a huge deal out of it, but they do raise enough questions to where it makes you go, okay, then who's her family? So why set this mystery up to begin with if you're not going to give us a satisfying answer to follow up on it? And for those of you who are going to say, no, that was intentional from the beginning, she's a nobody, she's a nobody. Maz Kanata said, whoever you're waiting for, they're not coming back, so therefore she's a nobody.
Well, then all that was for nothing?
Whether or not Rey's parents are nobodies, who knows, okay? Yes, Rey said that they were nobody, but that doesn't make it true because that's probably all she remembers. And Kylo Ren saying that you come from nothing, you are nothing, but not to me. Kylo Ren isn't exactly a reliable narrator. He told Rey earlier on that Luke was dead set ready to kill him in that tent. Yes, Luke wasn't exactly truthful at first, but Kylo Ren wasn't either. So you can't exactly take his word as the absolute truth. He was probably manipulating her, probably using her insecurity to manipulate her to joining him. And I think what really would have helped is that in an act of desperation, Rey deciding to join Kylo Ren, trying to find some sense of belonging. She didn't get that with Luke, she couldn't get that with Han, and since her parents are supposedly nobodies, again, whether or not that's true, who knows? But let's say that in an act of desperation for some kind of connection, she decides to join Kylo Ren, because there's clearly something linking the two together. Instead, they have her go, don't do this, Ben, please don't do this. And it's like, Ryan, what are you doing? Why are you writing it this way? Watching the movie again now, trying to play by its terms, the scene where it's revealed that Rey's parents are supposedly nobody, it didn't irk me nearly as much because I was waiting for the film to justify it. I thought, okay, if you're gonna do that, you better have a good reason for it. Actually, they don't. Like I said, people complained that Force Awakens was too familiar and too safe. A lot of people also said, I want Rey to be a nobody. I want Rey's parents to be nobody. So anybody can be a Skywalker. Anybody can be a Jedi. So they heard you, And they decided to go in that exact direction by letting Rian Johnson doing whatever the hell he wanted to do. And he apparently agreed with you guys. It's not just that, but the fan reactions to that. There was a lot of people that didn't like that explanation, but a lot of fans accepted the explanation. They acted like it was some kind of revolutionary idea. Yes, finally! This proves it! Anybody could be a Jedi! You don't have to be a Skywalker to be a Jedi. Really? Don't you remember the prequel trilogy? Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ki-Adi-Mundi, the other Yoda-like creature, and the other Jedi Knights on the Council? Last I checked, they were not related to the Skywalkers. And that, I think, was proof enough you don't have to be a Skywalker to be a Jedi. Why are you guys acting like this is something new to begin with? The prequel trilogy already established that stuff. So ultimately, who's to blame for this? Is it J.J. Abrams, who I know a lot of people have said that he tends to set things up that don't really get explained? Do we blame Rian Johnson, who seemingly threw all J.J.'s ideas out the window? Or do we blame Kathleen Kennedy, who didn't exactly have a concrete plan? I think it mostly falls on her shoulders, because I think it's pretty clear, based on what Rian Johnson has said publicly, she said to him, do whatever you want. That is not a good thing to do. I've heard people say that, studios need to stop getting so involved in the creative process and they need to let filmmakers make movies. I agree with that, but on principle. I don't want to make this video like 5 hours long or something, but sometimes complete creative freedom doesn't always mean the movie will be good. Because if the movie's not good, it's not good. You could give the prequel trilogy a pass because George Lucas had all the control, it was his vision, but yet a lot of people hate those movies because he controlled every single aspect and didn't allow people to give him advice, like he did with the original trilogy. Yes, it was his vision, but he also took advice from people. He had people keeping him in line. In all honesty, Kathleen Kennedy should have kept Rian Johnson on somewhat of a tight leash. Not completely tight where he couldn't do anything unique. Not saying that he can't take any risks or anything. If he had gone the route of making Rey join Kylo Ren, that actually would have been a really cool thing to do because it feels like it's done in service of the story and not being original for the sake of being original. And it's pretty reminiscent with the Rose and Finn storyline and how it's very unnecessary to the plot, but it almost seems like it kind of had to be there because at the very end of the movie, I know we're jumping that far ahead, but that broom boy seems to be like the new hope for the galaxy, and they're trying to say that anybody could be a Force user, anybody could be a Jedi, which again, we've already seen that established in the prequel trilogy. Ryan, that's not something new that you're expanding on.
It seems like the kind of throwaway Rian Johnson would do, and that JJ would be like, Ryan, that is so stupid. We're not having Broom Boy in the movie.
But there's also the fact that the codebreaker that Finn and Rose break out of that prison, that he later sells them out to the First Order. No kidding he was gonna do that. He's not exactly the most trustworthy person. It's obvious that he was gonna sell them out right from the get-go, and they end up getting taken prisoner by the First Order. But they try to portray him as like a guy with a heart of gold or something. Again, this is not a terrible movie by any means. There's just certain things in this movie that I just can't help but go, Ryan, what are you doing? This is dumb. If not Kathleen Kennedy, there had to have been at the very least somebody there on set tapping Rian Johnson on the shoulder at certain moments saying, Ryan, that's stupid. Don't do that. Then they could have avoided it. And we all know how Mark Hamill's basically come out and said that he didn't really agree with Rian Johnson's approach to Luke Skywalker. And then there's also this interview with Daisy Ridley.
Congrats on The Last Jedi.
Thank
Really
you.
enjoyed it.
Thank
you happy
you.
with it?
Sure. Yeah.
Let's go with that.
Now, does she hate the movie? No, I wouldn't. I don't think that's necessarily true. But I think on some level, she's trying to tell you that something's not right with the movie. In another interview that I heard, that when she heard that J.J. Abrams was coming back, she cried. I don't know about any of you guys, but I find that very telling. And if you ask me, Rian Johnson, if he wasn't going to be held to J.J. Abrams' standards, he should have just done his own trilogy right from the get-go that he's announced to be doing. Again, I'm not against the idea of filmmakers having creative freedom, but sometimes you have to keep somebody in line from doing something really stupid that's going to rub some people the wrong way. Marvel has done a good job of doing this, where, yeah, they're following a standard, and they have to make sure that the movies are connected with each other, but they also give the filmmakers some creative freedom to put their own style on it. The same thing should have happened with this new trilogy. Not really having a concrete plan, that is just disastrous. So Rian Johnson, yeah, did a lot of good things in here, but there's a lot of other things that he did that just made me go, Ryan, that is so stupid. Why did you do that?
You've got to go with the flow. Whether you agree with it or not, you've got to go with it, because if you don't, you will have chaos and you will have exactly what happened. Exactly what happened.
Okay, I basically just went off on one. I don't want to sound like I hate this movie, because I don't. There's a lot of good stuff in here, and going back to what I was talking about earlier, after the Resistance manages to get away, Admiral Holdo prepares her ship and goes into light speed, destroying all the First Order ships. Even now, just makes me go, Wow! And then they later end up on this ice crystal planet and an old rebel base where they form a last line of defense in these new updated AT-ATs, and older AT-ATs actually, with a big cannon that's set to fire through this big wall in order to break through and kill all the remaining resistance fighters. And Kylo Ren is on a shuttle with General Hux, which, General Hux, why couldn't they get that one First Order officer that was on the Dreadnought? That I think would have made it a lot more interesting. And it's very reminiscent of Die, you rebel scum! Not only that, but he kind of reminded me of George C. Scott as General Patton in the movie Patton, and has a very hawkish approach to a fight. That I think would have been a lot better than dealing with this uncomfortable, spoiled brat of a First Order officer. So the Resistance managed to get into these speeders that are very old and out of date, and they head towards the First Order forces, and the Millennium Falcon shows up, with Rey and the cannon seemingly okay with the information, which is another reason why that Rey's parents being nobody didn't work for me, but whatever. And Kylo Ren saying,
"Blow that piece of junk out of the sky!"
And Chewie doesn't really get a whole lot to do except flying the ship around, but he's still a fun addition nonetheless. Oh yeah, and the Porgs, they're okay, but they're really there just to be cute. They really have no other purpose in the movie other than that. The Ewoks, at least, in Return of the Jedi, you could say, yeah, they were a bit cutesy, but they at least had a purpose to be in the movie, because they helped the Rebel Alliance defeat the Empire. Even Jar Jar and the Gungans in Phantom Menace had more of a purpose than the Porgs. Oh my god, I cannot believe I just said that. Oh my god. Ugh. But at a point it seems like all hope is lost, and then Luke shows up and reunites with Leia. Oh, an emotional scene. It's such a great scene to see these two reunite. And it also contains one of my favorite lines from Luke.
No one's ever really gone.
So he goes out onto the battlefield to confront the First Order, and he faces off against Ben Solo. And he has a lightsaber duel with Ben. Well, not exactly a duel, but it's basically him confronting his past. And since I mentioned the theme of failure, to be honest, the only ways I think it really worked in this movie is that the only characters who really seem to let them realize their failure has gotten the better of them is Luke, Poe, and Ben Solo. Rey is actually more of a side character in this one. Yeah, she goes through some stuff, but the fact that we don't see that much training with her, that was really disappointing. And I really would have liked to have seen a scene with Luke telling her, hey, look, it's great that you're self-sufficient, but you can't just go running into a fight guns blazing. You gotta know when to pick your battles. Anyway, I just went off track, but that honestly I think is the best part of the movie for me. I was riveted from the beginning to the end of that scene. Kylo Ren goes in for the kill, and supposedly Luke is not dead, so he puts his lightsaber through him. It turns out he's a projection, because Luke looks really younger, his hair shorter, and you see Luke meditating on the island, hovering in midair, and he's projecting his image to Kylo Ren. And when I first saw this, and even now, it still makes me go, holy crap. That is awesome. And then after that, Luke dies. Oh my god, Ryan, why? Why? It was a great moment, him looking out onto the twin sunset with the binary sunset theme playing. But again, when I saw it on opening day, I instantly knew, like, he's gonna die? What? What? And that's another thing. This movie wraps everything up in just about a nice little bow. And at the end, I feel very, well, okay, I guess there's no need for episode 9 because you basically wrapped everything up in order for that kid with the broom to be, I guess, the next hope for the future. I know I sounded really negative a lot of the time in this video, but I still stand by this. There's a lot of great aspects to this movie. Luke, Kylo Ren, and Poe, the visual and production design, all spot on. And the music by John Williams, more or less recycled, yeah, but it's still just as romantic and moving as it has been before. Oh, and I just remembered this. When Finn goes to sacrifice himself in that cannon and then Rose comes in and saves him, she says, we can only win by saving those we love. Not nearly as bad, but I swear to God, it just reminded me of Anakin and Padme, and it absolutely made me cringe. I know I sounded really negative in this video, but I still don't think that the movie is as bad as people have made it out to be. There's a lot of great things about it, as I've mentioned. It's just very conflicting, and there's just some things in here that made me question, why was Rian Johnson not kept in line over this? At the end of the day, as a movie itself, I think it's fine. It's not a bad movie. It's enjoyable. It's got a lot of great moments in there, but as a movie, I don't think it's a cinematic disaster that fans have made it out to be. I think a lot of the backlash has been blown way out of proportion. Star Wars The Last Jedi, I would say, is a fine movie, but very uneven in its pacing and a bit rushed in some respects. Not the worst Star Wars movie, but far from the best. So those are my thoughts on Star Wars The Last Jedi. What are your guys' thoughts? Do you love it, like it, think it's alright, or do you hate it? Whatever the case is, comment below and tell me your thoughts. Civilly, please. Up next in my series of new Star Wars reviews is Solo: A Star Wars Story. Stay tuned for that, and I will see you all very soon.